I am the Criminologist, the voice and symbol of this channel. Listen closely. Every detail could be the key that was missed. Danette Millbrook and Jeanette Millbrook were fraternal twins born on April 2, 1974 in Augusta, Georgia. Described as inseparable, the sisters shared a close bond with Danette, often acting as the more assertive protector of the shy and reserved Jeanette. Both stood out for their distinctive jerry curl hairstyles, pierced ears, and matching scars above their navels from a childhood surgical procedure. Danette was slightly taller at 5'6" in and 130 lb, while Jeanette was 5'4" in and 125 lb. The twins attended Lucy Lanany High School, where they were known as responsible students with no history of behavioral issues beyond a minor altercation in 1989 when Danette defended Jeanette from a bully at a bus stop. The events of March 18, 1990 began uneventfully. Around midday, the twins accompanied their mother, Louise Sturgis, to Church's Chicken on Laney Walker Boulevard. During this outing, they mentioned to Louise that a man in a white van had followed them for part of their walk, a detail that would later loom large in the investigation. After returning home, the girls set out on foot to complete errands, unaware it would be their final day in the public eye. Before the disappearance, there were several key stops that the twins made. They visited their godfather's residence to borrow $20 for bus fare, as their family had recently moved to a neighborhood farther from their school. He provided the money along with extra cash for snacks and later recalled nothing unusual about their demeanor. Around mid-afternoon, the sisters stopped at their cousin's house, where they asked her to walk home with them. The cousin's mother refused, citing that it would turn dark soon. Family members later noted the unusual nature of this request, as the twins had never previously sought companionship for routine walks. The girls then visited their older sister, Shanta Sturgis, who had recently given birth. They stayed for approximately 15 minutes and again asked for someone to accompany them home. Shanta, preoccupied with her newborn, declined. This repeated plea for company struck relatives as out of character. At 4:30 p.m., the twins arrived at the Pump and Shop on the corner of 12th Street and Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. The clerk, Gloria, who knew the girls, sold them chips, candy, and soda. She later reported that they appeared calm and showed no signs of distress. Notably, Gloria did not witness them leave the store or interact with anyone outside, though she recalled a vehicle parked nearby. This sighting marked the last confirmed moment the twins were seen alive. At the time of their disappearance, Jeanette wore a blue pullover over a white turtleneck, a beige skirt, white stockings, and sneakers. Danette sported a white Mickey Mouse shirt, white jeans, and black shoes. Additionally, they had scars around their navy L's. These critical details were later muddled in police reports due to clerical errors, which was a recurring issue that hampered the investigation. When the twins failed to return home by nightfall, Louise grew increasingly anxious. After waiting through the evening, she contacted authorities the following morning, March 19th, only to be told that she must wait 24 hours before filing an official missing persons report, a policy later criticized as negligent. By the time police initiated a search, critical early leads had likely gone cold. Within a year, the authorities closed the case, offering the family inconsistent and ultimately false explanations. The Sturgis family was told the twins had either aged out of foster care or had simply turned 17, the legal age at which minors could no longer be classified as missing. Both explanations were demonstrably incorrect. The twins were only 16 at the time, and there was no record of their involvement in foster care. To make matters worse, a juvenile case officer erroneously reported that the girls had been found, which led to their removal from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children database. This error effectively erased their case from national missing persons registries, severely limiting both public awareness and investigative momentum. The investigation was further hampered by a series of egregious errors in the official documentation, many of which persisted for decades. The twins' surname was repeatedly misspelled as Millbrooks in police reports and national databases, and Jeanette's middle name, Latrice, was incorrectly recorded as Latrisa. Such inconsistencies created confusion and made it more difficult for other agencies and the public to connect with the case. There were also discrepancies in the recorded birth dates and the route the girls were believed to have taken home, with early reports incorrectly stating they had traveled down a different street than what witnesses later confirmed. Despite these setbacks, the Millbrook twins family, particularly their sister Shanta, never stopped advocating for answers. After more than 2 decades of persistence, their efforts finally paid off in 2013 when Richmond County's newly elected sheriff, Richard Roundtree, publicly acknowledged the mishandling of the case and reopened the investigation. Roundtree stated, "We think a terrible injustice has been done for the last 20 years and pledged to address the mistakes of the past." However, the renewed investigation faced significant challenges. With no crime scene, forensic evidence, or reliable physical clues, detectives were forced to rely almost exclusively on decades-old witness statements and family recollections. Complicating matters further, key figures such as the twins' father, John Millbrook, refused to cooperate with the investigation. He declined to provide a DNA sample and, according to reports, told associates to inform police he was dead if they inquired about him. In 2017, the case took another turn when Ernest Vans, a convicted murderer with ties to the Millbrook family, sent a letter from prison claiming the twins had died during a drug-related altercation at their father's home and that their bodies had been disposed of at the Mary Brothers brickyard. However, Vans's account was riddled with inconsistencies, including a misidentified timeline regarding a suspect's paralysis, and ultimately yielded no actionable evidence. In an effort to leverage modern forensic techniques, the sheriff's office collected DNA samples from the twins' family members in 2017. These samples were compared against unidentified remains in national databases, raising hopes for a breakthrough. One promising lead involved a Jane Doe found in Aiken County, South Carolina in 1993, whose facial reconstruction bore similarities to Jeanette. However, DNA analysis ultimately ruled out any connection, leaving the family without closure. The absence of the twins' dental records further hampered forensic efforts, as did the inevitable degradation of any physical evidence over the decades. As of 2024, the Sheriff's Office maintains that the case remains active, but meaningful progress continues to be elusive. The $50,000 reward for information has not led to any significant breakthroughs. Aside from the theory that involved Ernest Vaughn and the drug deal gone wrong, some believed that the twins had simply run away. This was the earliest and most persistent theory advanced by law enforcement. This explanation was offered to the family within days of the girls' disappearance and was used to justify the premature closure of the case. Police cited their age, the presence of the $20 between them, and vague rumors of family issues as evidence that they had left voluntarily to start a new life elsewhere. However, the runaway theory has been strongly refuted by the Millbrook family and those who knew the twins best. Both girls were described as homebodies with no history of running away or behavioral problems. They had a close relationship with their mother and siblings and left behind all personal belongings, including Danette's seizure medication, which she required daily. There was no evidence of planning, and the girls did not take identification or extra clothing. The family also pointed out that rumors about one of the twins being pregnant were unfounded. Neither had a boyfriend, and their older sister was a teen mom who maintained a good relationship with their mother, suggesting that pregnancy would not have been a reason to flee. The runaway theory is further undermined by the fact that neither girl was ever seen or heard from again. There were no phone calls, letters, or sightings, and their social security numbers were never used. The family's insistence that the girls would not have left voluntarily, combined with the lack of any evidence supporting the theory, has led most independent investigators and advocates to dismiss it as implausible. Another theory centers on the possibility that the twins were abducted by a stranger. On the day they disappeared, the twins told their mother that a man in a white van had followed them for several blocks and parked outside the gate of their housing project. This detail has led to speculation that the girls were targeted and possibly abducted while walking home from the convenience store. The last confirmed sighting of the twins was at the pump and shop gas station, where they appeared calm and untroubled. However, the presence of a suspicious vehicle and their repeated request for someone to walk with them suggest they may have felt unsafe. The area where they vanished, Bethlehem, was known for its rough reputation, but the twins were familiar with it and had never expressed fear before. The fact that two girls disappeared together in broad daylight without a trace is highly unusual, and some investigators believe this points to an opportunistic abduction by someone in the area, possibly the driver of the white van. Despite the plausibility of this scenario, the lack of witnesses and physical evidence has made it impossible to confirm. The police did not thoroughly investigate the van or canvass the area for additional information in the immediate aftermath, and the lead has never been fully explored. Another theory posits that the twins may have fallen victim to a serial killer operating in the Augusta area at the time. Joseph Patrick Washington, a convicted serial rapist and murderer, was active in the region in the early 1990s and targeted young black women, fitting the demographic profile of the Millbrook twins. Some advocates and family members have suggested that Washington could have been responsible for their disappearance, especially given the lack of evidence pointing to any other suspect. Despite the circumstantial similarities, there is no direct evidence linking Washington to the twins. His known victims were generally slightly older than the twins, and there is no record of him targeting multiple victims at once. Nevertheless, the possibility remains, especially given the pattern of violence against young women in Augusta during that era. On June 16, 1987, a disturbing event unfolded behind an auto repair shop on Collingwood Boulevard, just off Interstate 75 in Toledo, Ohio. It was here, in an alley behind the shop, that the burned remains of a young woman were discovered. The body, wrapped in a pink-colored cloth, had been deliberately set on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence and hinder identification. When investigators arrived on the scene, they found that the remains had been exposed to the elements for several days before their discovery. The victim's clothing included Jordache jeans, and her body was wrapped tightly in the pink cloth, which may have been used to transport or conceal her before the fire was set. The fire had not completely consumed the remains, allowing authorities to recover enough physical evidence to begin their investigation. A detailed examination of the body revealed several striking features. The woman was estimated to be between 16 and 21 years old, with a height ranging from 5'4" in to 5'7" in, and a weight of approximately 110 Lauerby. Her hair was short, cropped, and described as strawberry blonde in color. Her toenails were painted a polished pink, and she had 5 piercings in each ear, each adorned with small round pearl earrings. These personal touches hinted at her possibly being younger and individualistic, but they did not immediately lead to her identification. The Lucas County Coroner's Office determined that the woman had died several days prior to her discovery, but the exact cause of death was not immediately clear due to the condition of the remains and the effects of the fire. The body's location, behind a business near a major interstate, suggested that the perpetrator may have chosen the spot for its relative seclusion and easy access, possibly indicating that the crime had connections beyond the immediate Toledo area. Despite these clues, the investigation quickly hit a wall. The woman was not carrying any identification, and no missing persons reports from the area at the time matched her description. Authorities entered the case into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, and a forensic sketch was created and circulated to the public. The hope was that someone somewhere would recognize the young woman from her distinctive features or the circumstances of her discovery. The case soon became known as the Toledo Jane Doe mystery. As weeks turned into months and then years, the case grew cold. Detectives rotated in and out of the investigation, each bringing fresh eyes but ultimately facing the same lack of progress. The physical evidence was re-examined periodically, especially as forensic technology advanced. In 2007, some of the remains were tested again, but DNA technology at the time was not advanced enough to yield a match, or even a promising lead. The coroner's report eventually ruled her cause of death as a substance overdose with coke found in her system. This finding, while providing some insight, did little to explain the extreme measures taken to conceal her identity and dispose of her body. Why would someone go to the length of wrapping her in a blanket, putting a plastic bag over her head, and setting her remains on fire if her death was accidental or self-inflicted? Fast forward to the year 2024, we finally got a major breakthrough in the case. In October of that year, Detective Jason Mussey, who had long been troubled by the unresolved case, sought assistance from the Porch Light Project, a nonprofit dedicated to funding advanced DNA testing and forensic genetic genealogy for cold cases in Ohio. The organization agreed to cover the cost of testing, which traditional law enforcement budgets often cannot accommodate for older cases. This partnership was critical as previous attempts to identify the remains, including standard DNA analysis and nationwide database searches, had failed due to technological limitations and the degraded condition of the sample. The Porch Light Project connected the Toledo Police Department with Arm Forensic Laboratory. Ultimately, they were able to tie the victim to a family in Michigan, approximately 60 miles north of Toledo. On March 20, 2025, the Lucas County Coroner's Office officially announced that the remains belonged to Tammy Lowe, an 18-year-old from Taylor, Michigan, who had been reported missing in 1987. Tammy's background included struggles with addiction and economic hardship. According to discussions and reports following her identification, she came from a poor family and was facing significant challenges in her personal life at the time she went missing. These circumstances may have contributed to the lack of urgency or resources devoted to her case when she first disappeared, and may also explain why her disappearance did not immediately garner widespread attention. While the identification of Tammy has provided long-awaited closure for her family and the community, the circumstances of her death remain unresolved. Authorities have not publicly identified any suspects or clarified the exact events leading to her death. The burning of her body suggests an attempt to conceal evidence, but whether her death was the result of foul play or other causes has not been definitively established. Born on October 1, 1973, Megan faced challenges from an early age. In first grade, she was diagnosed with a mild intellectual disability, which led to her placement in special education classes throughout her schooling. Her mother, Cher Romero, described Megan as a child who struggled socially. Classmates often mocked her for her developmental delays, compounding her isolation. Despite these hurdles, Megan developed an outgoing and trusting personality, traits that would later define her interactions and ultimately contribute to her vulnerability. At 18, Megan married and moved to Arkansas with her husband. The marriage, however, quickly turned abusive. While details of the abuse remained sparse, testimonies indicate that Megan's husband subjected her to physical and emotional harm, prompting her to flee and return to her hometown of Lufkin, Texas, in the mid-1990s. Back in Lufkin, Megan insisted on living independently, renting an apartment at the Fox Run Apartments complex. Megan's mother later reflected on her daughter's trusting nature, noting that Megan's loneliness and eagerness for companionship made her an easy target for predatory individuals. This vulnerability was exacerbated by her frequent visits to local nightclubs where she sought social connection but often encountered risky situations. Such was the case on March 25, 2000. Megan began her night at the Electric Cowboy, a bustling nightclub she frequented. Witnesses recalled her dancing provocatively, a habit that occasionally led to confrontations with staff. On this night, she attracted the attention of an unidentified man who bought her 2 drinks at the bar. Descriptions of this individual varied. Some described him as a white or Hispanic male with dark hair and a cowboy hat, while others noted a white male with blonde hair and a mustache. The discrepancy in accounts would later complicate the investigation. Around midnight, Megan's behavior led security to ask her to leave. Sources conflict on whether she exited alone or with the man who had been buying her drinks. What is clear is that Megan, undeterred, proceeded to another venue, the Sports Shack, located just blocks away. There, Megan danced with acquaintances, including a bouncer who knew her well. She stayed for approximately an hour, during which she socialized casually, but showed no signs of distress. Around 1:15 a.m., the bouncer offered her a ride home, which she accepted. They arrived at her apartment complex, Fox Run Apartments, at 1:30 a.m. Megan's neighbor and close friend, referred to as Kathy or Tanya in reports, had waited up to hear about her evening. The two women spoke briefly on the balcony outside Megan's apartment. As they chatted, a car abruptly sped into the parking lot, screeching to a halt. Megan glanced down and remarked, "I think that's the guy from the club." She then descended the stairs to meet the driver while Kathy returned to her apartment. Minutes later, Kathy peered outside and noticed the car still idling in the parking lot. Megan was inside the vehicle, but the driver remained obscured. By 1:45 a.m., the car was empty, and Megan was no longer visible. Growing uneasy, Kathy knocked on Megan's door at 2:20 a.m. Megan answered, cracking the door just enough to reveal a man standing behind her. Kathy later described him as a white male in his early 20s, approximately 5'8" into 5'10", in tall with a slim build, blonde hair, a light mustache, and gold-rimmed glasses. When Kathy asked if everything was all right, Megan replied, "He's a friend from the club." The man nodded silently but avoided eye contact. Satisfied by Megan's assurance, Kathy left, unaware this would be the last time she saw her friend alive. At 4:30 a.m., neighbors reported smoke billowing from Megan's apartment. Firefighters arrived within minutes and broke down the door, finding the blaze concentrated on the bed. And it was after extinguishing the flames that they discovered Megan's charred body. Her remains were so severely burned that dental records were required for identification. It was during this window of 2:30 a.m. to 4:30 a.m. that Megan was subjected to a horrifying assault. She was found bound to her bed by her wrists and ankles with a plastic bag around her head. Additionally, someone had slashed her throat twice. Led by Lieutenant David Young of the Lufkin Police Department, the case quickly became a high-priority homicide investigation due to the extreme violence and calculated attempt to destroy evidence. Investigators noted several critical details. The apartment door and windows showed no signs of tampering, indicating Megan had willingly let her kill her inside. She was also wearing a partially burned nightgown, which former boyfriends claimed she only wore during romantic encounters. This led police to theorize she had invited the assailant into her home. Thirdly, the use of Megan's own pantyhose to restrain her suggested the murder was premeditated but executed with materials readily available at the scene. Forensic pathologists determined the cause of death as a combination of suffocation from the plastic bag and exsanguination due to the deep throat wounds. The arson was deemed a secondary act to obscure evidence, though its limited spread hindered this effort. Earlier in the evening, witnesses at the Electric Cowboy reported Megan interacting with a Hispanic or white male with dark hair and a cowboy hat who bought her drinks. This man was saw as a witness but never identified, creating confusion about whether he and the blonde suspect described by Kathy were the same person. Investigators pursued several lines of inquiry, focusing first on men who had been close to Megan. Her ex-husband, Tim Purvis, was a primary suspect due to his history of abuse and the fact that he had been released from prison just a week before Megan's murder. Megan's testimony had previously led to his parole being revoked, and he was known to harbor resentment. Tim claimed to have been watching movies with his mother in Nakogdoks, about 30 miles away, on the night of the murder, but he could not provide corroborating evidence for his whereabouts. He also failed a polygraph test. Despite these red flags, there was no physical evidence tying him to the scene, and he was eventually cleared as a suspect. Tim died in a car accident in 2003, effectively ending any further investigation into his possible involvement. Other former partners and acquaintances of Megan were also questioned. Each provided verifiable alibis, and none matched the description of the blonde man seen in Megan's apartment that night. Investigators even explored the possibility that a serial killer might be responsible, considering figures like Glenn Rogers, who was active in the 1990s and known for slashing his victims' throats and setting fires. However, no evidence was ever found to connect Rogers or any other serial killer to Megan's case. The investigation faced significant obstacles due to the state of the evidence. The fire had destroyed much of the potential DNA, fingerprints, and hair samples that might have been present on the mattress or Megan's body. Only the plastic bag and some remnants of the pantyhose survived, but forensic technology at the time was unable to yield any usable leads from these items. The significance of the nightgown also became a point of debate. While police believed it was evidence that Megan knew her killer, her mother argued that the killer could have forced Megan to wear it after the fact in an attempt to stage the scene. This theory was never conclusively proven or disproven. Some, including Megan's mother, accused the police of developing tunnel vision by focusing too heavily on the theory that Megan knew her killer and that the nightgown indicated a consensual encounter gone wrong. This, they argued, may have caused investigators to overlook other motives or suspects, such as individuals connected to Tim Purvis or others who might have harbored a grudge against Megan. Additionally, discrepancies in witness descriptions, particularly the difference between the blond man seen at the apartment and the dark-haired man at the club, created confusion and led to speculation that more than one person might have been involved in the events of that night. In recent years, there has been renewed hope for solving Megan Curl's murder. In 2025, the Lufkin Police Department announced that surviving evidence from the crime scene had been submitted for advanced DNA analysis, utilizing new forensic technologies unavailable at the time of the original investigation. But for now, the identity of Megan's killer remains unknown. The Harper's Ferry remains case began with the discovery of a body in 1996 and revealed a web of deceit, financial exploitation, and ultimately murder. On May 13, 1996, at Harper's Ferry National Historical Park in Loudoun County, Virginia, a park ranger noticed an unusual steamer trunk near the entrance to the park. The trunk was positioned next to a trash can along the road leading into the park. At first glance, it appeared to be discarded junk. The ranger, who was at the end of their shift and without a radio to communicate, decided to leave the inspection for another time, assuming it wasn't an urgent matter. This decision delayed the discovery of its gruesome contents by a full day. The following morning, another park ranger came across the same trunk. Its being covered in strips of duct tape immediately raised suspicion. The ranger decided to investigate further and began cutting away at the tape sealing the trunk. Upon opening it, they found an oddly shaped duffel bag inside. As they unzipped this bag, they discovered yet another duffel bag nested within it. The second bag contained soiled clothing, which seemed harmless at first. However, as the rangers sifted through the clothing, they made a horrifying discovery: a human hand tucked among the items. Shocked by this find, the ranger immediately stopped their search and contacted local law enforcement. When investigators arrived at the scene, they carefully examined the trunk and its contents. Inside, they found the emaciated body of an elderly man folded unnaturally into the cramped space of the steamer trunk. The victim's position suggested that significant effort had been made to fit him into such a confined area. The man appeared disheveled and unshaven, with only a pajama top covering his body. A pillowcase had been placed over his head, adding to the disturbing nature of the discovery. The condition of the body provided few immediate clues about the victim's identity or the circumstances surrounding his death. The lack of identification complicated efforts to determine who he was or why he had been left in such a manner. Law enforcement transported the body to a morgue for further examination in hopes of uncovering more details. The autopsy revealed critical information about both the victim's physical condition and cause of death. The man was determined to be approximately 5'7" tall and weighed only 111 pounds, an indication of severe emaciation at the time of his death. His age was estimated to be between his mid-60s and mid-70s. These findings suggested that he may have been in poor health or neglected in his final days. The medical examiner concluded that strangulation was the primary cause of death. Additionally, there were signs of blunt force trauma to the back of his head, which may have occurred either during or shortly before his murder. Toxicology reports revealed high levels of sedatives and tranquilizers in his system, indicating that he had likely been drugged prior to being killed. This combination of factors pointed to foul play rather than natural causes or accidental death. Further analysis suggested that the victim had died no more than 2 days before his body was discovered in the park. These findings narrowed the timeline for investigators, but provided little else in terms of leads. At first, investigators speculated that the victim might have been under someone's care before his death, possibly in a private home or care facility where he could have been neglected or mistreated. The presence of sedatives in his system led them to consider whether a caretaker or nurse might have been involved in his death. Police theorized that whoever killed him viewed him as a burden and sought to dispose of his body in an untraceable way. The location where the trunk was abandoned also raised questions. Harper's Ferry National Historical Park is a popular area with significant foot traffic due to its historical significance and scenic trails. Leaving such an incriminating item in such a public place seemed both brazen and desperate, a potential sign that the killer had panicked or lacked better options for disposing of evidence. Despite these early theories, investigators faced significant challenges in identifying both the victim and any potential suspects. The lack of identification on or near the body meant they had no immediate way of determining who he was or connecting him to any known missing persons cases. Without this crucial piece of information, their investigation stalled. For 7 years following the discovery of the body, authorities struggled to determine who the elderly man was. It was not until January 2003 that investigators finally identified the man as Jasper Jack Watkins through fingerprint analysis and military records, unraveling years of mystery surrounding his death and setting the stage for justice. Watkins was 76 years old at the time of his murder and had been estranged from his family for years. Born into a large family, he had served as a medic during World War II before transitioning into other roles within the military, including helicopter pilot and flight instructor during the Vietnam War. He earned numerous accolades for his service, including 6 Purple Hearts and the Vietnam Medal of Valor. After retiring from the Army, Watkins worked as a helicopter pilot for various companies before eventually settling into retirement. Despite his distinguished career and contributions to his country, Watkins's later years were marked by isolation and vulnerability. He became distant from his children and other family members, following personal struggles and relocations after the death of his wife. This separation made him an easy target for exploitation by a woman named Nancy Siegel, who entered his life under seemingly benign circumstances but ultimately orchestrated events leading to his tragic demise. Nancy was no stranger to fraudulent schemes by the time she met Jack. Born Nancy Schwitzer in 1948, she grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. Her early life was marked by instability. Her father raised her after her mother abandoned the family, but he was tragically killed outside a bar when she was just 16 years old. Despite this difficult upbringing, her adult life became defined by manipulation and financial exploitation. Her fraudulent activities began as early as her first marriage in 1968. She married Charles Kaczarski and soon began taking out loans and credit cards in his name without his knowledge. Her gambling habits exacerbated the financial strain on the marriage, and when they divorced in 1985, Charles was left with over $100,000 in debt tied to her fraudulent activities. Unfazed by the consequences of her actions, Nancy repeated this pattern with her second husband, Ted Geese, whom she married later that same year. Once again, she opened credit accounts using his personal information without his consent. By the time they divorced in 1993, Ted was saddled with over $18,000 in debt. Nancy's fraudulent schemes extended beyond her husband's to include her own children. She used the identities of both her daughters to open credit accounts without their knowledge and directed statements for these accounts to addresses she controlled. This destroyed their credit ratings and left them financially crippled. Additionally, between 1992 and 1994, Nancy targeted other romantic partners and acquaintances for financial gain. She often gained access to their mail or personal information under false pretenses and redirected their financial statements to her residences. These schemes allowed her to accumulate tens of thousands of dollars in debt under their names while avoiding detection. Fast forward to November 21, 1994. Nancy met Jack when he purchased burial services for his recently deceased wife. Jack was a widower nearly 30 years older than Nancy and lived a modest but comfortable life, supported by Social Security benefits and retirement annuity payments from New York Life Insurance Company. Before meeting Nancy, Jack had no debts. He owned his home outright and maintained only a few credit cards that he used sparingly. Nancy quickly ingratiated herself into Jack's life by presenting herself as a caring companion during his time of grief. Their relationship developed rapidly into what appeared to be a romantic partnership. Both described each other as fiancé to friends and acquaintances. However, Nancy's intentions were far from genuine. Within months of meeting Jack, Nancy began systematically exploiting him financially. By December 1994, just weeks after they met, she had gained access to his existing credit accounts and began making extensive charges for personal items such as jewelry and clothing. She also changed the mailing addresses on these accounts to her own residence in Ellicott City, Maryland, ensuring that Jack would not receive statements or notices about the mounting debts. By August 1995, Nancy had accumulated tens of thousands of dollars in debt under Jack's name. She persuaded him to take out a $44,000 mortgage on his home under the pretense that it would help pay off existing debts. Instead of resolving these financial issues, Nancy used the funds for new purchases while continuing to rack up additional debt on credit cards issued in Jack's name. In November 1995, Nancy convinced Jack to refinance his home again and give her $20,000 from the proceeds. She promised him that the money would be used to purchase a condominium where they could live together after their marriage. However, this promise was another fabrication. Instead, Nancy used the money for personal expenses while maintaining control over Jack's finances. Furthermore, Nancy's manipulation extended beyond financial exploitation. She also worked to isolate Jack from his social network. Before meeting Nancy, Jack regularly had breakfast with friends and maintained contact with stepchildren from a previous marriage. After becoming involved with Nancy, these interactions diminished significantly. She eventually drove him to one final breakfast where he said goodbye to his friends, a calculated move that severed his ties with people who might have intervened on his behalf. Nancy also intercepted phone calls from Jack's stepchildren by forwarding them to her own number without his knowledge. This further isolated him from potential sources of support or assistance. By early 1996, Jack's assets were nearly depleted due to Nancy's relentless exploitation. In April of the same year, she sold his home without his consent and attempted to have him wrongfully committed to a psychiatric facility by claiming he suffered from dementia. When no long-term care facility had immediate availability, Nancy brought Jack back to her condo. Upon his discharge from the hospital on April 16, 1996, less than a month later, in the middle of May, she murdered him. On the night of the murder, which is said to have occurred either on May 13th or 14, Nancy manually strangled Jack. The autopsy revealed cervical compression as the cause of death, with corresponding abrasions and subcutaneous hemorrhages on his neck consistent with strangulation. Additionally, there were fresh cuts and abrasions on Jack's body, as well as blunt force trauma to the back of his head. These injuries suggest that a violent struggle may have occurred before Nancy overpowered him. The toxicology analysis also showed toxic levels of sedatives in Jack's system at the time of his death. It is likely that Nancy administered these drugs shortly before killing him to incapacitate him further and reduce resistance. After murdering Jack, Nancy faced the challenge of disposing of his body in a way that would prevent identification and delay any investigation into his disappearance. She decided to stuff his emaciated body into 2 duffel bags before placing them inside a large steamer trunk. The next day, Nancy drove from Maryland to Loudoun County, Virginia. With the trunk containing Jack's remains in her vehicle, she chose a remote location near an access point to the Appalachian Trail along Route 340, which she believed wasn't heavily monitored. There, she abandoned the trunk next to a trash can under cover of darkness between approximately 8:30 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. Afterward, Nancy continued using Jack's identity for financial gain. She redirected his Social Security checks and retirement annuity payments totaling over $89,000 to herself by changing their mailing addresses, first to her residence in Ellicott City and later to a P.O. box under her control. In addition to stealing these funds, Nancy opened new credit accounts using Jack's personal information while continuing to use existing accounts she had already exploited during their relationship. Nancy never reported Jack missing or raised any concerns about his whereabouts following his murder. Because he had become estranged from much of his family by this time, and due to her efforts at isolating him, no one else reported him missing either. In early 2003, federal agents began surveilling Nancy after noticing irregularities in Jack's Social Security checks. They observed Nancy retrieving mail from the post office box where Jack's checks were being sent. Investigators also interviewed her daughters, Amanda and Jennifer, who revealed that their mother had occasionally deposited Jack's checks into their bank accounts without explanation. During these interviews, Amanda recognized the steamer trunk in which Jack's body had been found as one that had previously belonged to their family. She identified it by distinctive nail polish stains on its surface. In mid-2003, postal inspectors and FBI agents set up a sting operation to confront Nancy. They approached her at a post office in Ellicott City, Maryland, shortly after she retrieved one of Jack's checks from her P.O. box. Calmly agreeing to an interview, Nancy initially claimed that Jack was alive and living in Pennsylvania with a woman named Ruth. She stated that she had continued cashing his checks because he was a gambler who could not manage his own finances. When investigators pressed her further and revealed that they knew Jack had been dead since 1996, Nancy changed her story. She claimed she had found him dead in her home one day in May 1996, suggesting he had taken his own life. According to Nancy, she panicked upon discovering his body and decided not to call authorities out of fear that she would be implicated in his death. Instead, she claimed she cut him down from where he was suspended, placed him in duffel bags, and then into the trunk before dumping it near the park. Investigators found this account implausible. Despite her denials of involvement in Jack's murder, Nancy admitted during questioning that she had used his Social Security benefits after his death, but insisted it was only because he had trusted her to manage his finances. On January 16, 2004, federal authorities indicted Nancy for multiple offenses related to Jack's murder and the financial fraud she committed both before and after his death. The charges included second-degree murder for killing Jack Watkins, witness tampering for murdering him to prevent him from reporting her fraudulent activities, theft of government benefits for cashing nearly $90,000 worth of Social Security checks, identity theft for using Jack's personal information after his death, mail fraud and wire fraud related to her use of fraudulent credit accounts, and transporting a body across state lines to impede an official investigation. The case of Melissa K. Monday, often referred to as Missy and Jerry Strickland, is a tragic story of manipulation and crime. It unfolded in the mid-1980s, capturing national attention due to its shocking nature and the role media played in solving it. Melissa's life before 1986 was, by all means, pretty normal. Growing up in Maryland, she was an honors student, a member of the Future Homemakers of America, and deeply involved in school, church, and other extracurricular activities. Her upbringing seemed stable, and she was known for being a diligent and responsible young woman. However, her life took a dramatic turn when she met Jerry Strickland, a man 10 years older than her with a troubled past. Jerry entered Melissa's family's life under false pretenses. He approached them with the claim that he was interested in purchasing property to convert into an orphanage. This seemingly noble intention masked his true character as a manipulative individual with a criminal history. While Phyllis, Melissa's mother, was wary of Jerry from the outset, Melissa herself was quickly drawn to him. Jerry lavished attention on the 15-year-old girl, something she reportedly felt was lacking in her home life. This attention created an emotional bond that would lead Melissa down a dangerous path. By April 1986, Melissa had become so enamored with Jerry that she decided to run away with him. The pair left Maryland and relocated to Michigan, where they began living as a couple, despite their significant age difference. The relationship quickly became more serious. Within a short time, Melissa gave birth to their first child. This new chapter in her life marked the beginning of her descent into circumstances that would ultimately lead to tragedy. In Michigan, Melissa found work as an assistant manager at a Union 76 gas station. It was here that she encountered Elmer DeBoer, an oil company courier whose job involved collecting cash receipts from local gas stations. Elmer struck up a friendship with Melissa during his regular visits to the station. Unbeknownst to him, this seemingly innocent connection would later make him the target of a deadly scheme orchestrated by Jerry. Jerry's influence over Melissa grew more pronounced during this period. He had already demonstrated his ability to manipulate her emotions and decisions, and he now began involving her in his criminal plans. He devised a plot to rob Elmer during one of his routine cash pickups at the gas station where Melissa worked. The plan hinged on Melissa's role as bait. Her familiarity with Elmer would make it easier to lure him into a vulnerable position without arousing suspicion. The plan was to take place on May 11, 1987, in Waterford Township, Michigan. That Monday morning, as part of his usual rounds, Elmer arrived at the gas station where Melissa worked. When Elmer entered the gas station, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. However, investigators later pieced together a disturbing sequence of events. The robbery began when Jerry allegedly confronted Elmer at gunpoint after he opened the station safe to retrieve the cash. To make it appear as though Melissa was also a victim, Jerry reportedly forced her to handcuff herself to Elmer. This ruse was designed to convince Elmer that Melissa was not involved in the crime and that she too was being held against her will. Jerry then forced both Elmer and Melissa into a vehicle and drove them approximately 20 miles away to a secluded, wooded area. Once they arrived at the remote location, Jerry uncuffed Melissa from Elmer, likely to further maintain the illusion that she was not complicit in the crime. He then handcuffed Elmer's hands behind his back and executed him by shooting him twice in the back of the head with a .25 caliber firearm. The body was discovered the following day by authorities searching for Elmer after he failed to return from his rounds. His car had been left behind at the gas station parking lot, and investigators found no signs of forced entry or struggle inside the station itself. The safe had been emptied of its cash contents, confirming that robbery had been a motive. The nature of the crime suggested premeditation, and police quickly began piecing together evidence pointing toward Jerry and Melissa as suspects. The day after the murder, Jerry and Melissa used some of the stolen cash to purchase a vehicle at an auto dealership in Pontiac, Michigan. Witnesses later reported that Melissa appeared calm and composed during this transaction, showing no signs of distress or fear that might indicate she had been kidnapped or coerced into participating in the robbery. This behavior raised suspicions about her level of involvement in the crime and led investigators to conclude that she was not merely an unwilling participant, but an accomplice who had played an active role in carrying out Jerry's plan. After purchasing the vehicle, the couple fled Michigan and traveled across the country to Moses Lake, Washington. There, they attempted to start new lives under assumed identities while evading law enforcement. For several months, they lived quietly. Jerry took a job at a Kmart store while Melissa worked at a card shop, but their past would soon catch up with them. The case later gained national attention in February 1988 when it was featured on the television show Unsolved Mysteries. This program, hosted by Robert Stack, was known for its ability to bring unresolved cases to the public's attention, often resulting in critical tips that helped law enforcement solve crimes. Such was the case with the episode detailing the murder of Elmer and the subsequent flight of Melissa and Jerry. The episode outlined the details of the crime, including how Jerry allegedly used Melissa to lure Elmer away from his car before robbing him of $10,000 and ending his life. It also highlighted the couple's subsequent actions and their move to Washington. The show presented the couple as prime suspects in the case. Melissa was described as wanted for questioning due to her role in the robbery and her connection to Jerry, while Jerry was wanted for murder, armed robbery, and other charges. The broadcast included reenactments of key moments and photographs of both individuals, making it easy for viewers to identify them. Within minutes of its airing, the Unsolved Mysteries hotline received up to 20 calls from viewers who recognized Melissa and Jerry as residents of Moses Lake. These tips came from friends, acquaintances, and neighbors who had seen the couple living quietly in their community since June 1987. The reports provided law enforcement with precise information about their location. According to police accounts, Melissa and Jerry were staying at a friend's house at the time. Ironically, they had watched the Unsolved Mysteries episode themselves earlier that evening and realized their time on the run was over. When officers arrived at their location later that night, Melissa and Jerry were calmly waiting for them. They were arrested without incident and taken into custody at Grant County Jail. Melissa was 17 years old at the time of her arrest, while Jerry was 26. Both were extradited back to Michigan to face charges related to Elmer's murder. Melissa ultimately testified against Jerry as part of a plea deal in which charges of murder and kidnapping against her were dropped in exchange for her cooperation with prosecutors. She admitted to helping plan the robbery, but claimed she did not know that Jerry intended to kill Elmer. Jerry denied his involvement in Elmer's murder, but was convicted on all charges after Melissa testified that he confessed to her shortly after committing the crime. He received 2 consecutive life sentences without parole for first-degree murder and kidnapping. As of 2025, he remains incarcerated at Thumb Correctional Facility in Michigan. Melissa's legal outcome was markedly different due to her cooperation with authorities. In exchange for her testimony against Jerry, charges of murder and kidnapping were dropped. She pleaded guilty to armed robbery and served 2 years in a juvenile detention facility before being released at age 19. After her release, she returned to Maryland with her 2 children and has since lived a private life away from public scrutiny. Judge John C. Fairbanks' story is one of betrayal rooted in his dual role as a trusted legal authority and a calculating financial predator in Newport, New Hampshire. For over 3 decades, Fairbanks created a reputation as a reliable pillar of the community. A district court judge and probate attorney who managed estates, trusts, and financial accounts for residents of this small town of about 6,000 people. His clients included elderly retirees, local families, and even members of his own family, many of whom entrusted him with their life savings. Beneath this veneer of respectability, however, Fairbanks plotted an extensive embezzlement scheme, exploiting systemic weaknesses in the judicial and probate systems to siphon millions from those he was sworn to protect. Fairbanks' legal career began in the 1950s, and by the 1970s, he had become a central figure in Newport's civic and political life. He served as a district court judge while simultaneously running a private probate law practice, roles that granted him unparalleled access to the financial affairs of his clients. His prominence extended beyond the courtroom. He chaired the Sullivan County Republican Party, sat on the board of a local bank, and belonged to a well-established family with deep roots in the community. This combination of judicial authority, political influence, and social standing allowed him to operate with little scrutiny, even as his fraudulent activities escalated. His position granted him unrestricted access to client funds, which he diverted into personal accounts through forged documents and falsified financial records. For instance, he informed clients their estates were experiencing financial difficulties while secretly liquidating assets or transferring funds. One notable case involved a trust established for his 3 sisters, which plummeted from $500,000 in 1985 to $40,000 by 1989 due to his withdrawals. The scope of his theft expanded to include local institutions and even municipal funds. The town of Washington, 2 insurance companies, and a bank were among the entities that filed claims against him, with total losses eventually exceeding $10 million, far surpassing initial estimates of about $2 million. Victims like Harold Kamimer, a hardware store owner, lost $130,000 from an inheritance Fairbanks was tasked with managing. Elderly clients, including Gene Henderson, saw their life savings vanish, forcing some to sell generational property or face foreclosure. Newport's probate court, where Fairbanks operated, lacked fundamental safeguards. The Register of Probate managed operations from her nursing home bed, while the presiding judge, afflicted by failing eyesight, failed to detect irregularities in accountings. This absence of oversight allowed Fairbanks to forge documents unchecked, including falsified court orders and fabricated financial statements. His political influence as chairman of the Sullivan County Republican Party also delayed investigations into early complaints. The scheme also thrived on Newport's cultural trust in local institutions. Small-town norms, such as conducting business on handshake agreements, left residents unprepared to question a figure of Fairbanks's stature. This dynamic enabled him to manipulate clients into believing their financial losses were due to market downturns or legal complexities rather than theft. The first cracks in Fairbanks' facade appeared in 1988 when local resident John Tweedy discovered discrepancies in his brother's estate. Tweedy's complaints to the New Hampshire Attorney General's office were initially dismissed, but his persistence led to a 1989 expose in the Eagle Times, a local newspaper. The article triggered a wave of revelations with over 25 victims coming forward, prompting lawsuits and criminal investigations. By June 1989, mounting pressure forced Fairbanks to resign from the bench. A Sullivan County grand jury indicted him on December 27, 1989, detailing the embezzlement of at least $2 million. At the time, Fairbanks was living at his summer home in Ogunquit, Maine. According to his wife Miriam, he left that morning for coffee in downtown, but never returned. His pickup truck was discovered abandoned 5 miles away in a parking lot near Perkins Cove. Inside the vehicle were no clues about his whereabouts or intentions. Investigators quickly realized that Fairbanks had planned his escape meticulously. He withdrew substantial sums of money, estimated at over $1 million, from secret accounts before disappearing. These funds allowed him to sustain himself comfortably while evading authorities for years. One promising tip came in October 1991 when 2 individuals reported seeing a man resembling Fairbanks on the Caribbean island of St. Kitts. The man was said to have been purchasing a condominium under the name Joe. Investigators followed up on this lead but found no evidence linking Fairbanks to the island or its real estate transactions. Despite these setbacks, investigators continued to pursue any clues about Fairbanks's movements. They discovered that he had a fondness for traveling in the Caribbean, particularly Antigua, near St. Kitts. Additionally, telephone logs suggested possible communication between Fairbanks and his wife or children after his disappearance, though Miriam denied any contact with him. For several additional years, the case saw very little development. That was until 1994. On Thursday, March 24, 1994, John Fairbanks checked into the MGM Grand Hotel in Las Vegas under an assumed name. By this point, Fairbanks had been on the run since December 1989. His choice of Las Vegas as a temporary refuge was not unusual for fugitives. The city's transient population and bustling tourism industry made it an ideal location for someone seeking anonymity. However, despite his efforts to remain undetected, Fairbanks's time at the MGM Grand would be his last. On Sunday evening, March 27, 1994, hotel staff entered Fairbanks's room after he overstayed his 2-night reservation. The room was locked from the inside with a deadbolt, and what they found inside shocked them. Fairbanks was discovered dead with a plastic bag over his head. The bag was reportedly a hotel shoe bag secured with rubber bands. A note taped to the mirror identified him as John C. Fairbanks. Written to his son, the note provided personal details that confirmed his identity to investigators. Metro Police Sergeant Bill Keaton later confirmed that an autopsy ruled the cause of death as asphyxiation and classified it as a suicide. Fairbanks's decision to end his life may have been influenced by an unexpected encounter earlier that day. Alan Soucy, a police chief from Sunapee, New Hampshire, who had been involved in the original investigation into Fairbanks's crimes, happened to be staying at the same hotel. Allen later speculated that Fairbanks might have recognized him while walking through the casino floor or other public areas of the hotel. Allen said, "It made me believe that maybe he had seen me because I happened to be in the casino when this occurred." This chance encounter may have triggered panic in Fairbanks, leading him to believe that his capture was imminent. The note left by Fairbanks provided some insight into his thoughts during his final moments. Addressed to his son, it reflected a mixture of regret and resignation, but did not offer any significant revelations about his crimes or fugitive years. The note's placement on the mirror suggests that Fairbanks took a moment to confront himself before taking his life. Fairbanks's death brought an abrupt end to law enforcement's pursuit of him, but left many questions unanswered for both investigators and victims. Authorities were unable to recover much of the stolen money or uncover details about how he had managed to evade capture for so long. His death also deprived victims of any hope for additional restitution or closure through legal proceedings. If these cases left you unsettled, you're not alone. If you value careful, unembellished true crime reporting, subscribe to Criminologist and ring the bell. We dig for facts, not gossip. Share this episode, leave your thoughts below, and if you have any credible tips about the cases we covered, contact local authorities. Until next time, stay curious and stay cautious.